Hi, my name is Karen Howe, and this is our module on a framework for AI accountability reporting. So here is our framework for how to think about identifying and framing AI stories. Let's start with thinking about the different stages of modern AI development. We've already mentioned how modern AI models are developed with big data and big compute. Those are used to train models that are then used in applications that are deployed in different contexts around the world. So at each stage of this pipeline, which you can think of as an AI supply chain, there are critical issues that we want to investigate, actors we want to hold accountable, and people that get affected. And the following slides, we're going to talk about some examples of stories that you could cover in each of these columns. It's not going to be comprehensive, but it'll illustrate to you how this framework works. So when it comes to data, it's important to ask who is amassing that data and who is that data coming from? How might that scramble for data lead to a loss of privacy and consent, and a perpetuation of surveillance or the erosion of intellectual property? The New York Times had a really great story that highlights some of these challenges. OpenAI, Google, and Meta are all so desperate for data for training their generative AI models that they're disregarding the privacy guardrails that they themselves put in place. They're entering legally gray areas, and they're pushing to erode copyright laws to allow them continued flexibility to gather and use as much data as possible. There's also a question of who's preparing the data. It turns out that data scraped from the internet is messy and imperfect. It needs to be cleaned and labeled. And there are people who do that cleaning and labeling. So who are these people? What kinds of conditions are they working in? Rest of World had a really great story about how Chinese companies are using vocational school students to do data work, and those students often work, like many other data workers around the world, in exploitative conditions. When it comes to the compute column, you could investigate the environmental impacts of data centers. For example, data centers often consume a lot of water, fresh water, to cool down their computers. And for this story, the Oregonian sought to determine how much. The publication actually had to sue the water department for accurate numbers on how much a Google data center was using in their community. And it turns out it was using 29% of the city's total water consumption while the city was experiencing a multi-year drought. Here's another story from Manga Bay, where you see the same exact phenomenon happening in Latin America. In Chile and in Uruguay, during significant drought, data centers from Google and Microsoft are coming in, and communities are mounting significant pushback to gain better transparency and limitations on the water use of these facilities. And it's not just water. Data centers also use an enormous amount of energy. And the Washington Post has done a series of really excellent stories that look at how this energy bill can lead to all kinds of downstream effects, including by hiking up prices for everyday consumers. These can make for really great local stories. They can also make for really great global stories about how these data centers often rely on fossil fuel plants and impact the climate. You may have seen news from 2024 that Microsoft and Google saw a roughly 30% and 50% jump respectively in their emissions. And almost all of that was actually driven by both companies' rapid expansion in data centers. When it comes to the AI models column, you can investigate the bias of AI models. And there have been some really great stories out there, including this one from Bloomberg's, which found that Stable Diffusion, one of the most popular image generators out there, amplifies stereotypes about race and gender. And finally, of course, it's important to investigate what happens when these imperfect models get used in the real world. And this is an amazing story from The Guardian about how the government over-relied on AI translation apps that fail in poorly resourced languages. So there was an asylum seeker that ended up stranded in an ICE detention center for 6 months because he spoke a particular dialect that the app did not accommodate for. But because of a general automation bias where many agencies, companies, people trust AI systems more than they do humans, it never occurred to them to hire a human translator until 6 months in. So he was unable to meaningfully communicate with anyone for half a year.